The breeze played about as it whipped through the forge. Flames bellowed and popped as metal was worked. Sweat rolled down the cheek of a tough, dirty dwarf as she finished her work for a regular client. The enchanted hammer, freshly etched with new purpose. The crack of snapping wood drew her attention to the inside of her shop. A glance through the window revealed a pair of thieves tossing the place about. With one hand, she grabbed the hammer and rushed for the side door. As the door flew open, the thieves, faces obscured by scraps of fabric, turned in surprise. The surprise turned to laughter as they took in the smith's stature. The dwarf did not mince words. The intruders were to exit immediately or face her wrath. With a chuckle, the first made his way over with a confident walk. As he approached, the dwarf's eyes began to glow red. With her free hand, she traced an elaborate shape in the air, and a glowing symbol, the color of burning flame, appeared on the man's forehead. Before the second could warn him, the approaching thief's head combusted. The pain was immeasurable. He fell to the floor, holding his burning scalp in agony. The smaller thief, who had kept her distance, hurled a knife at the dwarf, striking her in the shoulder before tossing another which fell wide of its target. Without hesitation, the dwarf rushed the knife juggler, mallet raised in a single hand. The rune once etched in the weapon glowed a deep silver as it evaporated, covering the weapon in a like-mannered hue. The thief attempted to block the blow with her arm, but the power was overwhelming. The hammer broke her arm and rendered her unconscious in a single blow. The blacksmith watched as the two were hauled off by local authorities. A simple smile adorned her soot-covered mouth as she cleaned up the mess. Hello and welcome back, adventurers. Captain TTRPG here with another impossible magic video, this time on the other class I have not covered yet, the Runesmith. These are learned sculptors of arcane power. Runesmiths use their knowledge to grant might through the use of carved and traced runes. Runesmiths are nearer martials, as I designate them, who use intelligence as a primary ability score rather than strength or dexterity. They get 8 hit points per level. They are proficient in simple weapons, martial weapons, and light and medium armor by default. They have decent hit points, but they do have good armor training, which puts them in a similar defensive boat with classes like the Inventor. You are also trained in perception and reflex saves, but expert in will and fortitude saves right away. You start trained in crafting, one of the four magical traditions, you know, arcana, religion, nature, and occultism, and 2 plus intelligence modifier skills, so probably 6 more. Again, your base stat is intelligence, which means you're going to be great at recall knowledge, crafting during downtime, especially being a crafter, and you can be a bit of a skill monkey if that's the route you want to go. The runesmiths have 4 key level 1 features and terms that we need to discuss, as well as 2 features above level 1 that are of note that I'm going to bring up. The first and clearly most important feature here are your runes. These are not permanent runes like we're used to on items. You're going to apply these temporary runes in 2 ways. You're either going to etch them or trace them. Etched runes are semi permanent, meaning that they last for the day or until you invoke them. We'll get to that because you're expending them in a way when you do that. At level 1, you can have 2 runes etched at a time. They can be etched during daily prep or with 10 minutes of downtime. And that second one's really important because you can etch in the middle of the day. And you're going to want to before every combat if you can. Trace runes are very short lived. You have to have a free hand or be wielding your artisan's toolkit in order to trace them. And then you're either going to trace a rune for one action onto an adjacent target, which could be a creature or armor or a weapon or something like that, depends on the rune. Or you can use 2 actions and apply the rune to something within 30 feet of you. These runes last until the end of your next turn, so this is a combat use. You can have as many of these runes, meaning traced runes, as you want at a time, and they don't count against the etched runes. So you have those 2 etched runes, even if you don't trigger them or anything, you can still trace as many runes as you want. As for the runes themselves, we'll get to that in a bit on what actual runes exist, but that's the basic ways of applying runes. Runes are also tied to spell traditions, either innately, and they'll be listed in the rune. I may not mention that while we're running through the runes, but they can have one of the traits attached to them, or you can choose which one they are for certain ones. So they'll just be listed as magical, and then you choose what tradition they are part of based on what traditions you have access to on your skill training. It matters because there are certain abilities and spells and things that block certain magical abilities with traits from different traditions. So yeah, it affects what interactions your runes have with these other abilities and spells that exist in the game. Runes are always your level, and if they have an entry level, it means that it's character level, right? So you have a level 1 rune, but it's going to level with you. So even if you grab it later, it's going to be your level when you use it. This also matters for dispelling and things like that, that it's your level. Okay, so what about when you have a rune already applied? Well, runes actually have two aspects to them. They have a passive benefit and an invocation most of the time. There are certain types of runes that don't have an invocation, but we'll get to that. To use the invocation, you use the action Invoke Rune. This is one action. You can invoke up to 2 runes with one use of Invoke Rune. You choose which runes are invoked. So let's say you have 4 in play, right? You've etched 2 and you've traced 2. Great. When I invoke, I'm choosing which 2 of those I am setting off. That is important here. After a rune is invoked, it disappears. So runes are all temporary in that way. Even etched runes are going to disappear after you invoke them. 2 copies of the same rune can't affect the same target at the same time. Normal rule stuff. There are special runes that are different from that general set of rules that are called diacritic runes. These runes have the diacritic trait. You can see an example here. This is Sun, diacritic rune of preservation. These runes, rather than being etched or traced onto a creature or an object or something like that, they're only applied to other runes. So they're an adjustment to a different rune. And when the base underlying rune is invoked and disappears, it triggers, or it at least gets rid of. Sometimes that actually triggers, sometimes it doesn't. The diacritic rune as well. So with the basics of runes there, how many runes do you actually get to know? Well, here is the rune table. At level 1, you're going to know 4 runes, level 1 runes, and you can of course etch 2 at a time. As you level up, every 4 levels above first, so 5th, ninth, so on, you add 2 more runes to your repertoire and 1 more to the number you can have etched at a time. You can get up to a pretty good number that you have etched, which means start of day you can have a lot of runes going on. On top of those unique level 1 features, you also get the shield block general feat here, which is nice to have as you might want to wield a shield. There are some nice shield related runes. So, what about those higher level features I talked about? Well, at level 2, we have Runic Crafter. This says that when you become the level to learn a fundamental rune, so, right, weapon potency runes are at level 2, for instance, and striking rune, the first striking rune, is at level 4. When you become the right level for that, so level 2 for potency, level 4 for basic striking, you automatically learn those fundamental runes for weapons, armors, and shield. You just learn them for free. You just know them. So at level 2, you would learn your first potency rune for weapons and be able to craft it because you know it. And this also gives you the magical crafting feat for free, which is huge. So a lot of crafting available to you as it should be. This makes you really valuable to the party instantly outside of encounters. So you want downtime. Also, starting at level 4 and every 2 levels after that, you learn the formula for an armor or weapon property rune for free as well. So you just get to choose one. It has to be of your level or lower, but you're just learning property runes as well. You can do all sorts of rune crafting for your party for the permanent ones and really help reduce cost of these things and make them available in campaigns where they might otherwise be very difficult to make available. Our other higher level feature worth mentioning is at level 9, and that is Assured Runic Crafter. This says that when you craft a magic rune, meaning permanent ones, right, not your class ones, you get a degree of success higher than your roll. So if you normally would roll a success, which is pretty often if you keep your crafting up and you're int based. So probably should be pretty often. You're going to get crit successes all over the place. But on that occasion where you fail, it's going to move up to success. Finally, it is worth noting this isn't really a special thing, but it's worth noting that your class DC actually follows spellcaster progression. So you're going to get to legendary class DC at level 19, which certainly isn't always the case. With the features out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the runes themselves. Runesmiths don't have a subclass, they have their rune repertoire. So, how you select them is basically a build your own subclass like we had with Commander. Runes are available at levels 1, 5, 9, 13, and 17. There are 16 first level runes, 8 fifth level runes, 12 ninth level runes, 4 13th level, and 4 17th level for a total of 44 runes, of which you will only ever have 12 in your repertoire at a base. Not saying there aren't feats and things to add more later, but 12 is your base. I'll show you all of the level 1 runes, and then I'll pull one from every other level just to show off kind of what's in those levels. So, what do runes have on them? Well, they're going to have a usage, means what you can apply it to. Then they have their passive benefit, and then they have the invocation that occurs when you invoke the rune. So, let's go ahead and jump in here. And by the way, I'm going to get the pronunciation of all these names horribly wrong. Horribly wrong. Just bear with me. I promise I'm not trying to do it wrong. It's just going to be terrible. Atril, Rune of Fire. This can be used on a creature or an object. The passive here is while it is applied, the creature reduces any fire resistance they might have by 5, and immunities are unaffected. So it's just if it has fire resist, that resistance is reduced by 5. When you invoke this, the bearer takes 1d8 fire damage with a basic fortitude save, and yes, that resistance reduction does apply to this. On a crit fail, they're also dazzled for 1 round. When you heighten here, it's not like spells, it's actual levels. When I say level +2, it's your actual character level. So at level 3 and 5 and what when it's a +2. So level +2, it reduces the resistance by another 1, and it adds another 1d8 damage on the invocation. Then we have Bariul, Rune of Hold's Bravery. You use this on a willing creature. The passive benefit, as long as the bearer is within 10 feet of an ally, the bearer reduces their frightened condition by 2 whenever they would normally reduce it by 1. So helping really keep it away. The invocation. Each ally of the rune bearer in a 10-foot emanation of them reduces their frightened condition by 2. Then we have Komanika, Rune of Perplexity. The usage is on a creature. The passive is the first time each turn that the bearer uses a concentrate action, meaning an action with a concentrate trait, it takes 2 mental damage. The invocation, the bearer takes 1d4 mental damage with a basic will save, and on a fail, is also stupefied 1 or stupefied 2 on a crit fail. Level +2 adds +1 to the base damage and adds 1d4 to the invocation damage. Then we have Esvidir, Rune of Whetstones. You use this by applying it to a slashing or piercing weapon or unarmed strike. The passive is on successful strike. You're going to deal 2 persistent bleed damage per weapon damage die. The invocation, this deals 1d8 slashing damage to an adjacent creature with a basic reflex save. And level +2, the invocation damage goes up by 1d8 slashing damage. Then we have Holtrick, Rune of Dwarven Ramparts. This is put onto a shield. The passive is that when the shield is raised, the AC bonus applied from the shield raising is increased by another 1. And the invocation is you raise the shield of the bearer for them, and the extra AC still applies until the beginning of the creature's next turn. So if they don't raise it themselves, you can just lift it for them and give them some more defense. Then we have Ledria, Rune of Appeal. This is applied to a creature. The passive is they get a +1 status bonus to deception, diplomacy, and performance checks. The invocation is each creature in 30 feet of the bearer can step closer to the bearer as a free action. At level 9, this becomes a +2 status bonus for the passive, and at level 17 is a +3 bonus to the status for deception, diplomacy, and performance. Then we have Liskil, Rune of Frost. The usage is on a creature or object. The passive here is the creature or object has a -5 status penalty to their speeds. If the creature or object takes a move action on its turn, it is clumsy until the start of its next turn. Clumsy 1. The invocation, the bearer takes 1d4 cold damage with a basic fortitude save. All squares under and adjacent to the creature, meaning the rune bearer, become difficult terrain for 1 round. And on a level +2, you're going to add another d4 damage to the invocation. Then we have Marsil, Rune of Impact. This is placed onto a bludgeoning weapon or bludgeoning unarmed strike. This adds 1 bludgeoning splash damage per weapon damage die. You and the bearer are immune to this. The invocation, this adds another damage die to the next successful strike with the weapon for the bearer if it happens before the end of the bearer's next turn. This also forces the struck creature to make a fortitude save or be pushed 10 feet back on a fail or 20 feet on a crit fail, and that is away from the bearer. Then we have Olginex, Rune of Coward's Bane. This is also put on a shield. The passive here is this, while raised, the shield also gives +2 status bonus to the hardness against ranged physical attacks. The invocation is that this creates an illusion that forces adjacent enemies to the bearer to not be able to move away from the bearer for 1 round unless they disbelieve the illusion, which generally takes a seek against the Runesmith's class DC. Level +4, you increase the hardness by another 1. Then we have Pluna, Rune of Illumination. This is on a creature or armor. The passive is the bearer is going to create bright light in a 20-foot emanation and dim light for another 20 feet. Any creature in the light has a -1 penalty to their stealth checks. That'll be a circumstance penalty. The invocation here is each creature in the light must succeed at a fortitude save against your class DC or be dazzled for 1 round. Keep in mind that the bearer doesn't have to take the brunt of that. Dim light remains for 1 round after invoking. It's just a 20-foot dim light. Then we have Ronshu, Rune of Thunder. This is not a creature or object. The passive is if the creature doesn't use a move action on its turn, it takes 3 electricity damage at the end of its turn. And the invocation, the bearer takes 1d8 electricity damage with a basic fortitude save, straight up. Level +2, passive damage is +1, and the damage on invocation is +1d8. Then we have Regog, Rune of Bestial Might. This is cast on a willing creature. The passive is that the creature gains an imprecise scent sense of 30 feet. The invocation, the creature can step as a free action. The next unarmed strike it makes before the start of the Runesmith's next turn, deals an extra die of damage. Then we have Certum, Rune of Preparedness, cast on a creature. The passive is that you have a +1 status bonus to survival checks and any specific lore checks that you choose when casting the rune. Those have to be related to like an area that you're in. The rune bearer can use survival for initiative rolls, and the bonus that you give also applies to that initiative roll. The invocation is that the rune bearer can step up to 3 times as a free action. At level 9, this gives a +2 to those survival and lore checks, and at level 17 is a +3. Then we have Thulax, Rune of Corrosion. This is used on a creature or object. The passive is the resistance to each physical damage type, slashing, bludgeoning, piercing, are reduced by 1, and immunities are not affected, just that resistance if they have any. The invocation, the bearer takes 1d6 acid damage with a basic fortitude save, and on a crit fail, takes 1 persistent acid damage. Level +2, the reduction increases by another 1, so level +2, it's now a 2 reduction to all physical resistances, and the damage goes up by 1d6 for the initial and 1 persistent on a crit fail. Almost done, I promise. We're getting there. There's a lot of these. Then we have Tylus or Telus. Yeah, I'm not sure. Rune of Vocabulary. Funny one for me to stumble this much with. Usage is on a creature. The passive, the bearer is going to gain knowledge of a language that you, the runesmith, know that they do not. And they're going to get a +1 status bonus to society checks and lore checks related to writing. So if they've got like library lore, scribing lore, things like that. The invocation. The rune bearer auto succeeds at flat checks made due to auditory disruption. So like the deafen condition, stuff like that, for 1 round. And during this 1 round, they can speak their true mind, even if confused, controlled, or unable to speak generally. That status bonus that we got, the +1, becomes a +2 at level 9 and a +3 at level 17 for the passive bonus. And our final level 1 rune is Zok, Rune of Homecoming. This is put onto a creature. The passive benefit, creature has a +15 status bonus to their speeds, but only when movement would end them closer to you than when they started. They don't have to constantly move toward you, but they have to end closer to you. The invocation, you teleport the rune bearer to an unoccupied adjacent space next to you. If the creature is unwilling, it can make a will save to negate it. All right, so let's jump up to level 5 here. All of the runes at level 5 are diacritic runes, runes that are applied to other runes. So here we have Sun, diacritic rune of preservation, which I showed a little earlier. Again, you put it onto a rune. The passive benefit, after the base rune is invoked, that base rune is then immediately traced back onto whatever it had been on. The special condition here is you can only have one Sun diacritic rune applied at a time at all. And after invoking the applied rune, you can't use this again for 10 minutes. Then we jump up to level 9, and we're back to the base kind of rune again. We have Kojastri, Rune of Insulation. This is placed on armor. The passive benefit here is the bearer gains resist 4 to your choice of either cold, electricity, or fire. Any creature that hits with an unarmed strike or a non-reach melee weapon on the bearer or touches them takes 2 damage of the associated type. This has the trait of the chosen type. So if you chose cold, it's got the cold trait. Then the invocation. Any creature that has the bearer engulfed, restrained, grabbed, or swallowed whole takes 8d4 damage of the associated type chosen with the passive with a basic reflex save. On a fail, the bearer is also released. Level +2, the resist goes up by 1, the passive damage goes up by 1, and the invocation damage goes up by 2d4. Then we get up to level 13 here. Again, level 13, all of them are diacritic runes. So we have Sar, diacritic rune of righteousness. Obviously, you're applying it to a rune. The passive benefit is the base rune gains the holy trait, and so does any damage dealt by it. If applied to an unholy creature, that unholy creature is enfeebled too as long as the rune is applied. There's an invoke here. When the base rune is invoked, the creature also becomes drained 1. No save there, just becomes drained 1. And finally, at level 17, we have regular types of runes again. This is, oh boy, Iuan, the Elf Gate key. And this is used on a creature. The passive benefit, once per turn, when the bearer would stride, they just teleport the distance they could stride instead. And the invocation. You teleport the rune bearer adjacent to any other rune on the same plane of existence. If the creature is unwilling, they get a will save and can at max be moved 60 feet. By the way, this was nerfed heavily from the playtest where there was no range. You could just teleport them, which doesn't even sound crazy until we get to the special part of this. If you have the sigil cantrip, you can send creatures to one of your sigils as long as that's on the same plane of existence. Now, I'm not sure if this overrides the 60-foot rule. Probably not. Again, this is why it was really a little bit broken in the playtest. You could potentially take that boss creature, because this doesn't have incapacitation, and if they failed, send them to your sigil in a prison underground on the same plane of existence 200 miles from here, which sounded amazing, but yeah, it's probably too strong. So as you can see, there are lots of designs here. Damage, support, survivability, all sorts of things here. But how about the feats? Since this is a martial, I'm just going to go through the level 1 feats and give a few of the higher level ones, but we have plenty of things to show here. Start off with Backup Runic Enhancement. This is level 1. You can cast Sigil as an innate spell at will. Hey, we talked about how that could be useful. Once per day, you can cast your choice of either Runic Body or Runic Weapon as an innate spell. The rank is equal to your level divided by 2, rounded up, which means caster progression. The tradition can be any for which you are trained. So if you're trained in Arcana, you can make the tradition of these cast as arcane spells. Then we have Engraving Strike, level 1, 1 action. This has the Flourish trait, and you have to be wielding a melee weapon. You trace a rune onto the melee weapon in reverse, and then you make a melee strike with the weapon. If you hit, it traces that rune onto the target. This is really important if you're going to be a melee martial. It's one of two very, I think, high value melee martial possible routes. Anyway, we'll get into the other stuff here. Then we have Glyph Familiar. Level 1, you get a familiar. With yours, your familiar only gets one familiar or master ability per day rather than two, but you can choose master right away. But your familiar always has three abilities in play: Construct, Flyer, and Tough. So those are pretty good. Then we have Remote Detonation at level 1 here. This is one action, is also Flourish. You make a strike with a ranged weapon that uses physical ammo, bullets, arrows, whatever, in the first range increment for the weapon. You also invoke runes on the target, up to two of them on a hit. So if the strike was a crit, the creature also gets a -1 penalty to any saves against the runes. But yeah, you're able to trigger runes with your strike, assuming you hit with it. Kind of like we talked about with the melee one, this is your ranged option that I think is really critical for a build that works really well with tracing runes and then triggering them. Then we have Rune Ward, level 1. This is a reaction. When you are targeted by a spell, assuming you're trained in the related skill for the tradition of the spell, you gain +1 circumstance bonus to your saving throws or AC against that spell. All right, then we have Rune Singer, level 1. You have to be trained in performance. You can use performance instead of crafting for crafting checks related to runes if you want to, and that's all rune stuff you do, downtime, whatever. Once per 10 minutes, you can trace a rune by song, requiring no freehand and reducing the two action version of tracing to one action. You must be able to make a clear sound with your voice in order to do this. Only a couple left here. We have Seek the Hidden Glyphs, level 1. You get a +1 circumstance bonus to perception checks to find magical traps. Even if you're not searching for them, you get a check to find them, assuming you meet other requirements to find them, right? Assuming there's nothing else about it that's special. If you have artisan tools, you can actually disable magical traps using your crafting as if it was thievery. So you're just using it in place of. If you trigger a magical trap by crit failing to disarm it, you can actually trace a rune on yourself that you know as a reaction before it goes off. And our final level 1 feat here is smithing weapons. If you are wielding a hammer, knife, or pick weapon, so any from those groups, you don't have to have artisan tools in order to trace runes. A strike with one of these deals 1 fire damage to a creature if a rune is traced on it. So if you wanted to go with a two-hand melee weapon build, you could take a pick or a hammer. I don't think there's any two-handed knives. And you could still trace runes. This, isn't for etching. This is for tracing. You don't care about it for downtime. You can trace runes with that in two hands, which is really interesting and gives you another build style. This wasn't in the playtest, and this is a huge improvement in my mind. Okay, a few higher level ones. We have Tracing Trance. This is level 6. Is a free action. Happens at the beginning of your turn. You become quickened until the end of your turn and can use the extra action only to trace runes, which means you can just straight up trace one if it's adjacent, or you can supply one of the two required for range tracing, using this reaction. You cannot invoke any runes this turn, though, so you're making a trade off. You can do more tracing, but no invoking. Then we have Overloaded Ammunition, level 10. During daily prep, you inscribe two pieces of ammo, arrows, bullets, whatever, as explosive ammunition. The DC is actually your class DC, making it good. They stop being inscribed if not used that day, though, so you don't get to hoard them up. And at 14th level, this becomes greater explosive ammunition instead. And then at level 20 for that super high level feat, we have Forge New Word. You're going to create a new rune special to you that embodies a common spell, or at least a spell that you are aware of, that you have access to, of fourth rank or lower, and add it to your repertoire. So you're going to have a rune that triggers a fourth rank spell. The spell must take no more than two actions, so one or two actions specifically to cast. The new rune has the associated trait for the school it's from and the unique trait as well. It can be traced or etched onto a creature or object despite what the spell is. When invoked, you choose who or what it affects using the bearer as the origin for the cast. The bearer can, of course, still be the target, but it doesn't have to be. If it would be a duration for the spell that's longer than 1 minute, though, the duration is just 1 minute for this casting. So many options of what you could do with this, but again, you are level 20. Having gone through all of that, let's go ahead and jump into our class breakdown graph. This is a really interesting class when we look at tactical options. Your etched runes provide a lot of strategy, more strategy than tactics, but how you invoke them is absolutely tactical and really changes up how you play the class. Your repertoire also helps because it can potentially add a great deal of variety. Again, that's more on the strategy side, but when to apply the various ones you have is absolutely tactical. Using them to protect allies, deal damage, keep yourself alive. There's just a ton of choices to be made, which I do like. I like that you can really build out very different characters here. But there's also a lot of overhead for them. And compared to spells or even what we see kineticists able to do, they feel like they're a bit on the weaker side. So not all of your choices are going to have equal impact here. You can also combo these with weapon attacks, and you should, but putting it all together, this can be kind of tricky. Each turn, you're going to have a lot of options, but you'll always feel like you don't have quite enough actions to do everything you wanted to do. Still, because you have so many options, and you can probably build your repertoire in a way that allows you to suit most situations, I'm going to give it a 4. It's not caster level 5 stuff, but it's solid. As for single target damage, you are martial, which helps. We have runes here that deal damage, which is certainly nice to add on top of normal damage, but you're not going to hit like a barbarian or a fighter or something. The damage from the runes isn't that high. It's good. It's definitely good, but it takes a lot to set up. Thankfully, in this version, we can actually wield two-handed weapons, which does help us deal a little extra damage. You have to take a feat to do that, but honestly, that will help with your damage if you want to lean into that. So if you don't take that feat though and you go two-handed, you will have to drop a hand off in order to trace and then grab the weapon again. So that's not going to feel good. If you're going to go two-handed, take that feat. So while you can deal decent damage, I don't think this ever jumps above a 4, but you're still going to hit decently hard. So don't be upset about that. On the AoE and multi-target damage side, you do not do that well. Sure, you can have runes on multiple targets, but that's usually just worse than loading up a single target and dealing damage with them. You don't have any built-in ways to deal true AoE damage, aside from like some tiny splash damage, which I'm not going to count here. There are a few feats that can help with this a little bit, but honestly, this is a 2. This is not what you do well. As for support, you actually do very well here. Are you cleric levels of support? No, but you do have some pretty solid runes that you can etch on for allies that they probably just want to keep on. You may not even want to invoke. You can help them avoid using their own actions for defenses by invoking sometimes. You can provide momentary increases to resistances or, you know, uh, various defensive actions. Again, you aren't going crazy here, but I like that there are runes that do this. And it would just be a 3 for me. But you also have the downtime application of being able to make permanent upgrades, which is absolutely something on the support side that I will not ignore. So this gets bumped up to a 4. We didn't really get into a lot of control runes, but there are definitely control runes, especially at higher levels. We saw even one decent one at level 1 to keep creatures from getting away from an ally who's a tank. Well, again, we aren't caster levels of control by any means. There's some interesting options here. I like that we can force enemies to stay near Rune Bear, or at higher levels, we can actually create good sized areas of difficult terrain and similar effects. Again, I didn't get into all those. They absolutely exist here. This is similar to the support side, but without that nice downtime boost, so it's going to get a 3. And finally, we have survivability. You get 8 hit points a turn, and medium armor, which gives a good start. It's challenging to wield a shield, though. You wouldn't think it would be, but it is because if you wield a shield, you still need a hand to trace. Now, if you do a pick or an axe or whatever, then yeah, you can go ahead and wield that if you take that feat and have a shield. But again, you have to take that feat then. Otherwise, you're having to have a free hand and a shield if you're going to use shield. So even though you get shield block, you may not be able to use it depending on your build. Still, you know, there's good options of here for runes you can etch on yourself that are nice and defensive. There's going to be challenges, though, to you being as tanky as some of the marshals. I don't feel like I can go higher than a 3 on this. I think that there may be interesting options here for shield builds, but I don't think that's the primary way to play this. And you might lose out on some of the other things I rated a little higher, assuming you'd have a weapon that's regularly used. I do think that runesmiths run into some challenges being as effective as other classes on a first look, thanks to action economy and restrictions on tracing runes. But if you build right for it, I think you can avoid a lot of that. Having said that, some of the builds that you might want to consider. So we can definitely go with melee frontline attacker build. Obviously, int is always your highest, but then we're going to want to go high strength because we got medium armor, just a +1 in dex gets us our AC we want. You want some con in there. You're probably just dropping charisma and wisdom on this, but that's for one-handed or two-handed builds with melee weapons. I think you can go either way. Then you've got range builds that are obviously possible here as well. Just go dex after int on that one. You can probably drop strength entirely and pull in one of the mental traits, grabbing probably wisdom, I would think. But if you want charisma, I like charisma as well. I think you're good either way. You can go just a full rune build where you're all about just tracing runes and triggering them. And in that case, you can go more mental stats if you want to. Again, you could still have, well, you might need some strength over time to boost this up. You can still take medium armor and just take some of the restrictions with it. If you wanted to, you could have a little higher dex and drop the charisma here. But I think if you want to go a more mental build, you can really do that. And you can go a more defensive build. Here you could switch con and dex however you want it, either higher AC or higher hit points. I like the higher hit points because as you build up slowly, you can get better armor and really fill that out since you still have medium available to you. But it is possible if you just want to be as tanky as possible, throw in a shield, take high dex or high con, and then just deal with tracing runes as well. You could even be up in melee, not dealing necessarily weapon damage, but doing all your rune stuff up there and being more defensive. For a first build, I think a melee weapon user is a good place to start. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a Warhammer here. I'm not going to use a shield, and I'll explain why in a bit. As for armor, I'm going to go ahead and take a breastplate here. We've got +4 int. I'm going to take +3 in strength, meaning we don't have any penalties from the breastplate. I'm not worried about that. +1 to our con and +1 to our dexterity, so we can round out our AC. For the runes, I'm going to go ahead and take Atrial Rune of Fire, as well as Liskil Rune of Frost, because I want some damage options here. Then Holtrick Rune of Dwarven Ramparts. This is something I probably etch most of the time at the beginning of the day. And I'm going to want a couple that I like to etch. The other would be Marsil Rune of Impact that I can have etched on my weapon. Again, you don't have to use it for yourself. I'm building this one in that more selfish direction, but you could, of course, etch these onto allies as well. The feat I'm going to take at level 1 is Engraving Strike, which is why I'm not throwing a shield on, because I still want to be able to trace runes in combat and swing my weapon. So yeah, Engraving Strike helps that a lot. That all being said, let's show off an example of Runesmith gameplay. The town of Fairhaven has been overrun by infected animals from the nearby wilderness. The cause is as yet unknown, but the townsfolk hide inside their homes until the problem can be dealt with. A pair of adventurers just starting out have picked up the job to eliminate the creatures before tracking their origin. As Gale, a runesmith, and Chuck, a guardian, make their way into town, the infected creatures sense them immediately. Before they can truly prepare, they are attacked, and all roll initiative. An infected rat goes first. It rushes Chuck and attacks, landing one hit, dealing 4 damage and poisoning him. Gale is then up. She can see that the other animals are focusing their gaze on Chuck as well. Early in the day, Gale etched the rune of Dwarven Ramparts on Chuck's shield, while etching a rune of impact on her own warhammer. Gale decides she needs to make sure to help Chuck out, but also do some damage herself. She strides up to flank the rat with Chuck. Then, on her second action, she uses Engraving Strike. When she hits the rat, She deals 6 damage and applies a rune of fire to the rat. Thanks to her weapon etching, she also dealt 1 splash damage to Chuck, but he shrugs it off. Gale then invokes the rune of fire and Chuck's rune of Dwarven Ramparts at the same time because she can invoke 2 at once. The rat fails its save and takes 7 fire damage, which burns it to a crisp. At the same time, Chuck raises his shield, giving him +3 to his AC. The centipede and spider rush up to either side of Chuck. The centipede arriving first, it attempts 2 strikes against the burly warrior, but with 22 AC, that's not going to happen. The spider is able to flank with the centipede and lower Chuck's AC to only 20. The attack lands, dealing 4 damage and forcing a fort save on Chuck, which he fails, making him stupefied 1. The spider then rushes away, but not too far, wanting to strike again soon. Chuck is finally up and takes his anger out on the centipede. With a strong strike, he critically hits, dealing 16 damage, destroying it. Rather than chase the spider, he decides to taunt it and raises his shield. He then makes his saves against both poisoning, taking 3 damage and ending the effects. Gale is now up again. With only the spider remaining, rather than rush it, she uses 2 actions to trace the rune of frost on the spider, and then 1 action to invoke her own rune of impact. As long as she successfully strikes before the end of her next turn, she'll do extra damage with that strike, another damage die. The spider now has reduced movement, and if it moves, it becomes clumsy 1. The spider then springs into action. It uses a web attack against Chuck, which hits and immobilizes him. The spider then runs up to Gale and strikes because it moved, becoming clumsy 1, hitting for 6 damage, but Gale succeeds against its venom. Chuck uses his first 2 actions to attempt to break free, but sadly
Brr.
fails. All he can do to help is taunt the spider. But Gale has no fear. With weapon rune already invoked, she uses Engraving Strike once again. She successfully strikes the spider, applying the rune of fire, but also, thanks to hitting for 2d8 plus 3 for 15 damage, she just destroys the spider instead, and it is squashed beneath her hammer. She then helps pull Chuck from the webbing before they analyze the dead creatures for clues. Being an intelligence based near martial, there are certainly options when it comes to multi-class archetyping. You could lean into that martial side and go with something like an exemplar for an icon or guardian if you have the right stats for it, which is a nice one. Gunslinger can be interesting if you go for that one-handed gun build, but keep in mind the action economy is a little bit stressful there. And of course, given the number of near martials, you could just grab one of those. Grab Alchemist, you're already great at crafting. Get a lot of alchemical items along with all the other things you can already do with your crafting so you can support allies even better, or Investigator or Inventor for some interesting stacking of skills and abilities. I like the idea of reaching beyond that sphere and going with casters, though. Again, intelligence is your primary, so take an intelligence caster. Grab Wizard or Witch, or grab the new Necromancer. These are all really great options. You can take Psychic if you want to. It's a little worse after the remaster, but again, these are really great choices for spellcasters to add some variety to what you can do. Or finally, just go with Magus again. You get casting, you get Spell Strike. It lines up really nicely with what you do. It feels very thematic as well. So many good choices to go with the Runesmith. And that's it. What do you think? Are you more excited about this or the Necromancer? Very different vibes. What do you think of the gameplay? Does it seem like a style that'll work for you? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, adventure on.